Something happened in the days before June 19, 2026, that the headlines could not quite contain. The United States and Iran, two nations that had spent the previous 4 months trading fire across the Persian Gulf, whose strikes and counterstrikes had choked the Strait of Hormuz and shaken the price of oil to levels not seen in a generation, announced they would sign a memorandum of understanding at a Swiss mountain resort called Bergenstock. A 60-day ceasefire, a reopening of the strait, the faint, fragile architecture of peace. And at the Vatican, in a small apartment overlooking St. Peter's Square, a man from Chicago read the news and said it gave him hope. That man is Pope Leo XIV. And his road to this moment, the road that runs through public denunciations, presidential insults, a defiant flight to Africa, and 2,000 years of papal history, is the story this video is going to tell. Because the question worth asking is not whether Leo XIV literally stopped a war with a phone call or a document. He did not claim to, and neither should we. But a harder, older question is worth sitting with. When a man who speaks for 1,300,000,000 souls stands in the middle of a gathering storm and refuses to be silent, does that voice change anything? Does it change anything that cannot be measured? The faithful watching this late at night already know what they believe the answer is. Let's start at the beginning. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated strikes on Iran. Nearly 900 strikes in 12 hours. The targets were missile stockpiles, air defense systems, military command infrastructure. Among the dead was Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. The Middle East, already wound tight after years of proxy conflict and failed nuclear negotiations, crossed a threshold it had been approaching for a long time. Within hours, the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which 1/5 of the world's oil supply flows every single day, began to close. Iranian assets and allies moved to restrict traffic. Tankers sat at anchor. Fuel prices spiked from Seoul to Sao Paulo. The war was not contained. It never is. In Rome, it was before dawn when the news arrived. Pope Leo XIV had been pope for less than a year. Elected on May 8, 2025, he was the first American ever to sit on the chair of Peter, a fact that made what was coming even more extraordinary, because the nation now at war was his own. He had been born in Chicago. He had studied in Washington. He knew, better than perhaps any pope in history, exactly what it meant when American power decided to act. On March 2nd, 2 days after the strikes began, Leo XIV appeared at the Sunday Angelus in St. Peter's Square. The crowd was enormous. The world was watching. And what he said was not diplomatic in the soft bureaucratic sense of that word. It was direct. It was blunt. It was, in the estimation of many observers, a rebuke. He did not name the United States. He did not need to. The world understood exactly what he meant. That one statement set off a sequence of events that would define his early papacy. Within days, the Trump administration's reaction arrived. Not through diplomatic channels, not through any quiet conversation between the Apostolic Nuncio and the State Department, but in the manner of our age. Social media, amplified, rapid, and unsparing. The president accused Leo XIV of being, among other things, weak on crime. A strange charge to level at a pope, but a revealing one because it told the world that this was not a policy disagreement. It was a contest of authority. Who speaks for Christian civilization in a time of war? Who has the right to define justice, to name the limit of permissible violence, to say this far and no further? A president who had won the votes of tens of millions of American Catholics? Or a pope who had been chosen by the College of Cardinals to carry the moral weight of the universal church? The answer, for Leo XIV, required no deliberation. In April, aboard the papal plane en route to Algeria, the first stop on a 10-day tour of Africa, he faced reporters who asked him about the president's attacks. He did not equivocate. There it is, that is the line that certain Catholics will remember for a long time. Not because it was inflammatory. It was, if anything, measured and precise, but because of what it named. It named the category error. It said, "What I am doing and what you are doing are not the same kind of thing. You are doing politics. I am carrying a gospel. And the gospel does not negotiate its core claim, which is that the human person made in the image of God cannot be unmade by any earthly power, however great. This is not new. This is what popes have always believed. But it lands differently when the Pope is an American, and when the President is also an American, and when the country in question has just launched 900 strikes in a single night. But here is what the people watching from the outside often miss. The Vatican is not merely a moral voice. It is a diplomatic actor with a track record that stretches back across centuries. The Holy See maintains formal diplomatic relations with nearly every nation on earth. It has no army, no navy, no aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf. What it has is something rarer, a reputation accumulated over 2 millennia for being a party that can speak to both sides without being owned by either one. Pope John XXIII helped walk the world back from the edge during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. A message, careful, quiet, delivered through channels that no government would acknowledge publicly, helped give Khrushchev and Kennedy a path that did not end in nuclear fire. Pope John Paul II's moral and diplomatic witness across the 1980s was described by Mikhail Gorbachev himself as having been essential to the peaceful end of the Cold War in Eastern Europe. Pope Francis used the Holy See as a back channel for the historic normalization between the United States and Cuba in 2014, a deal that had seemed impossible for half a century and became possible in part because there was a party that both sides trusted enough to whisper through. The Vatican does not always succeed. It failed to stop the First World War, failed to halt the Holocaust in time, failed to prevent Cambodia or Rwanda. Its history carries real shadows, and the Church has acknowledged many of them. But as a durable, neutral, credible diplomatic actor in a world of states that distrust each other, the Holy See occupies a position that no other institution on earth quite replicates. And that history is the context in which Leo XIV's voice carries weight, not just the weight of faith, but the weight of centuries of patient, persistent engagement with power. From March through June of 2026, that engagement was constant. In April, as a fragile ceasefire held and the United States and Iran began face-to-face negotiations in Pakistan, Leo XIV presided over an evening prayer service in St. Peter's Basilica. It was not a press conference, it was a liturgy. But the world's cameras were there, and what the world saw was a man on his knees in front of the Blessed Sacrament, praying for peace, while 2 nations that had just killed tens of thousands of people were sitting across a table from each other for the first time. The optics were not staged. The prayer was real. Throughout April and May, Leo continued to call publicly for dialogue, for ceasefire, for what he described as a reasonable, authentic, and responsible approach to resolving what he called the delusion. The word he chose was delusion of omnipotence, not the strength that comes from moral courage, but the delusion that military force alone can resolve conflicts whose roots go down into history, into culture, into grievance, into faith itself. Trump continued to take aim. In May, a new front opened. Interior Secretary Doug Burgum dismissed Leo's warnings about artificial intelligence, a separate concern the Pope had raised, as irrelevant, as the White House resisted guardrails on a technology that the Vatican had been warning about for years. Each attack came, and Leo XIV did not flinch from any of them. That is worth pausing on, because one of the things that made this papacy different from the moment of its beginning is the quality that those who know him have always named first when they describe Robert Prevost, the man who became Leo XIV. A quiet stubbornness, a willingness to absorb pressure without being moved, a sense that the office he holds is not a political one, and therefore cannot be intimidated by political weapons. He did not call Trump an enemy. He did not issue condemnations. He kept doing what he said he was doing, carrying the message of the gospel, which is that peace is possible, that dialogue is always better than war, that the human being on the other side of the bomb is a person with a soul. And then, in the second week of June 2026, something moved. On June 14th, the White House and Iranian officials announced that a framework agreement had been reached. A memorandum of understanding. A 60-day ceasefire. The reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Discussions on sanctions, on frozen assets, on the future of Iran's nuclear program. The signing would take place at Bergenstock, Switzerland on June 19th, the same Swiss mountain resort where other fragile agreements had been hammered out in years past. The Vatican's response was immediate. Pope Leo XIV welcomed the deal with, quote, gratitude, expressing hope that it would strengthen mutual trust between the parties and lead to a lasting peace. He did not take credit. He did not claim that his voice had been decisive. He gave thanks. That too is worth noting, because it is the response of a man who believes that what happened was not his doing, or not only his doing, but something larger than any individual actor in the drama. Is the title of this video a provocation? Yes, a deliberate one. Stopped a war. Did Leo XIV literally stop this war? No. The war was stopped by negotiations, by the exhaustion of both sides, by international pressure, by the quiet work of Swiss diplomats and Pakistani intermediaries, and American negotiators, and Iranian officials, who understood that this could not go on. Humiliated Trump. Did the Pope intend to humiliate the president? No, Leo XIV has said consistently that he speaks not against any person, but for a principle. But here is what is also true. A man who faced the full weight of the American presidency and did not move, who was called weak and political and naive and wrong, repeatedly and publicly, by the most powerful elected official in the world, and who continued, month after month, to say the same thing, to pray, to call for dialogue, to insist that the gospel has something to say about war. That man is now watching a peace deal be signed in Switzerland. And when the cameras close in on the table at Bergenstock on June 19th, the church that never backed down will be watching too. There is a word for what Leo XIV demonstrated across those 4 months. It is not power in the way the world usually uses that word. It is not leverage, not military capacity, not the ability to sanction or bomb or blockade. The word is witness. Moral witness. The insistence that the truth of the human condition, its dignity, its worth, its ultimate accountability to something beyond any nation-state, cannot be made to disappear just because a powerful government finds it inconvenient. The Catholic tradition has a long memory for this. It remembers Thomas Becket, killed at the altar because a king could not tolerate a conscience that would not yield. It remembers Thomas More, who said the king's good servant but God's first, and paid the price. It remembers the bishops of the early church standing in front of emperors and saying, "There is a law above your law, and we are bound by it." Leo XIV did not die for his witness. He was not imprisoned or exiled. But he held the line in the specific way that the 21st century demands. In public, under scrutiny, against a tide of derision and political pressure, with cameras recording every word. He held it not with anger, not with drama, not with the performance of righteousness, but with a quiet, stubborn, almost domestic insistence. I am here to carry the gospel. This is what the gospel says. I am not afraid. The faithful who are watching this video late at night, and you know who you are, the ones who have been wondering whether the church still means anything in a world that seems to have left it behind, deserve to hear this clearly. Your church has not gone silent. Your Pope stood up in front of the whole world and said that human life is sacred, that bombs are not diplomacy, that there is always another way. He said it when it cost him something. He said it when the most powerful person on earth was mocking him by name. He said it when it would have been much easier, much smoother, much more politically convenient to say nothing, or to say something careful and forgettable. He did not. And on June 19th, 2026, in a resort in the Swiss mountains, 2 nations that were at war are going to sign a piece of paper that says, "We will try for 60 days to stop killing each other." That is not nothing, whether this peace holds, whether the deeper questions of Iran's nuclear program, of the region's stability, of the long shadow of American power in the Middle East, whether those questions get answered in 60 days or 60 years, no one can say. The church does not promise easy outcomes. It promises that the truth is worth saying, even when it costs you, that the gospel is worth carrying, even when the world mocks it, and that somewhere in the long arc of history, the witness of those who refuse to be silent is part of what bends that arc towards something better. Pope Leo XIV is 49 days away from the 1-year mark of his papacy. He has already stood in front of a president and said, "No." He has already knelt in front of the Blessed Sacrament, while 2 nations negotiated their first ceasefire. He has already shown, in a way that the Church's long memory will carry forward, what an American Pope looks like when the gospel and national interest collide, and which one he chose. The doors of Bergenstock will open on Friday. The signing will happen, or it will not. The peace will hold, or it will crack. History does not announce its own conclusions, but this much is certain. The voice from the Vatican was not silent. And for 1,300,000,000 people around the world, that silence would have been the worst outcome of all. If this video helped you see something you hadn't seen before, please subscribe. This channel exists to tell the stories that the headlines pass over. The deeper current beneath the news, the place where faith and history are still moving together. God bless you, stay with the church, she is still here,